Former U.S. Senator Fred Harris, a longtime resident of Corrales, was Oklahoma's U.S. Senator from 1964 to 1973 and was appointed by President Lyndon Johnson to the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, also known as the Kerner Commission. The commission's report, which came out in 1968, examined the conditions of poverty and race in the country. Senator Harris will soon release a book on the 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission report. Correspondent Russell Contreras sat down with Senator Harris to talk about his history in politics.
Senator Fred Harris, thank you for joining us here. We really
Sure.
appreciate it. Take me back to 1967. What was going on in the country in our urban areas, and how did you respond as a senator?
Well, we'd had a riot in the black section of Los Angeles the year before, and there's some people had said that was it. No, it was to 65, and some people had said it was a kind of a one-off incident, and others said, is this a harbinger of things to come? Well, it was the latter. And so in the summer of 1967 in Detroit and Newark, and in about 20-something other cities around the country, we had just explosions in the black sections of America's cities. I was a member of the Senate. I was a member of, with Robert Kennedy, of a Ribicoff committee looking into urban problems and problems of racism as well as poverty. And so I went to the Senate floor and introduced a resolution to create a Blue Ribbon Citizens Commission to look into these riots, not just only from the law and order standpoint, but also trying to get at the deeper causes of wretched poverty in these central cities and racism. And I held hearings on it in that resolution in my committee I chaired, subcommittee. But then it occurred to me that Lyndon Johnson himself, the president, could do this by executive order. So I got word to him, urging him to do that, and that's what he eventually did, pretty much using some of the same words I had.
When the president said he was going to announce this commission, he did call you and say he wanted you on it. What did he tell you, and how did that happen?
It was kind of funny. I had there had been an announcement that the president was going to have a nationwide broadcast to appoint this Blue Ribbon Commission, and so I had brought a television into our living room and invited some neighbors, friends of mine, to come over and watch the president's speech. And about 10 minutes before he was to go on the air, my youngest daughter, Laura, she was then, I think, in the third grade, she came running out of the kitchen where we had a wall telephone and said, "Daddy, President Johnson's on the phone for you." And so I said, "Is it the president or is it his secretary?" "No, it's the president." He said, "This is President Johnson. Let me talk to your daddy." So I went in to the wall telephone and I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. President." And he said, "Fred, I hope you're going to watch television." This is word for word. "I hope you're going to watch television tonight." And I said, "I am." And he said, "I'm going to appoint that commission you've been talking about." And I said, "Well, I think that's the thing to do." And he said, "I'm going to put you on it." Well, I said, I never expected that, but I'll do the best I can. He said, "Now don't be like some of your colleagues." He said, "I appoint them to things and they never show up." And I said, "Well, I'll show up. I'll work at it." And he said, "Another thing, Fred." I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. President." He said, "I want you to remember you're a Johnson man." And I said, "I am a Johnson man." He said, "If you forget it, I'll take my pocket knife and cut your blank off." He did not say blank. He said, "You understand that kind of talk, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." So I went back into the living room and they said, "What do you say?" I said, "Well, some of it was kind of personal." It turned out, of course, Johnson did not like our eventual report of that Kerner Commission, as it came to be called, and I think thought I had forgotten that I was a Johnson man. That was really sad because President Johnson, did more to combat racism and poverty than any president before or since, but he was misled about what we recommended and rejected our report.
Now, this was a bipartisan body. What did you guys hope to find?
Well, what we wanted to do was to make first find the facts. What are the facts in these central cities? For example, police community relations, which turned out to be horrible. There was enormous hostility. Why had these riots occurred in one place and not another? We never were able to answer that, but we could describe with particularity the conditions in the cities where riots had occurred. And we wanted to come up with solutions, what we must do to get at these problems of poverty and racism, which were at the base of these riots.
When you visited some of the riot cities, or cities that had suffered riots, and you talked to black residents, what did some of the black residents tell you the problem was?
Well, all of them were complained. Everybody we talked to complained about the police. There was enormous hostility to the police, and for example, President Johnson, and as he talked to me about it several times during the commission, at least 2 times during the commission's meetings, he said he thought that there was some conspiracy behind these riots, that people like H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael, who were militants of the day, black militants, he thought they somehow planned these riots and caused them by their agitation. And I tried to tell him that no, that wasn't true, that there were thousands of H. Rap Browns and Stokely Carmichaels that neither he or I had ever heard of, but that there was such hostility and the conditions were so terrible in these central cities that almost any random spark could set off a riot. And that's exactly what had occurred.
Now, when you visit these cities, you had already spoken out about poverty and inequality before this.
Yes.
But when you visited these cities, what changed in you when you saw the poverty?
Well, what it did not surprise me. I expected that, but it really sort of put faces on racism and poverty to see the actual results. Also, it did this too. For example, we divided up, people on the commission divided up into teams and went around to where the cities where the riots had occurred. John Lindsay, Mayor Lindsay, and I turned out to be a team. And
The mayor from New York.
yeah, Mayor John Lindsay of New York. He and I were the actual activist leaders on the commission, and we were a team. We went around to Milwaukee, for example, and Cincinnati. I spent the morning in Milwaukee in a black barber shop, and I talked to people as they came in, men, and what I found was these people had come to Milwaukee fairly lately. This was true all over the country. There'd been a great surge of people moving, black people moving from the south into the cities in the north looking for work. And they came to places like Milwaukee just about the time the jobs were disappearing or moving out to the suburbs or moving overseas. And so we talked about that with people, but also I would start out asking, do you find as much discrimination against African Americans in Milwaukee or back home in Birmingham or wherever, Jackson, Mississippi? And at first, people were puzzled, and I found out why. Because in Milwaukee, most of them said they never saw any white people. It was more segregated than the places where they had come from in the South, that much segregation existed. Today, that's a problem that's rising again. Our cities, our schools are resegregating, and that's not good.
So after weeks of research and after you guys debating and voting on the commission, what did the commission finally conclude?
Well, sort of the most famous finding was our nation is moving toward 2 societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Today we would add Hispanics to that. But also we went on to say that these black ghettos were created by white racism and sustained by white racism. And that came, of course, as a kind of a shock to people, but it was the truth. And we also tried our best to help people see through our eyes the kind of wretched poverty, the terrible housing, 2 and 3 families living in what had once been a single family home, jobs gone, no public transportation, inferior schools, and so many of them had already come from criminally inferior schools back in the South, and that it was really urgent that we get at these problems, and we were quite honest in saying that it was going to take a great increase in federal funds to combat them. We also, for example, dealt with the police. We said that the police ought to look like the people that they're policing. In other words, we were for what came to be called community policing, that people were right in the neighborhood. Instead, what it was in those days, the police were all white, and they were coming in to enforce the law, in a sense, against the people locally there, so that people didn't see the law and law enforcement as their own. And we thought attitudes ought to change, the use of force. We were against the militarization of the police. And we made headway on all these things, race and poverty and police relations for a time, but then that progress stopped, and we began to go backwards.
The report that you guys were set to release at the end of February and beginning of March in 1968, you guys were doing background, but the Washington Post got a hold of the report ahead of time. Someone leaked it to them.
Yes.
What happened after that?
Well, we knew, first I should say, we made a mistake in not having our hearings. We had hearings for something like 20 straight days. We heard from everybody, from all the way from FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we made a mistake not having those as public hearings. And we also made a mistake, I think, of not taking the press with us as we went around to these riot cities so that they could see it personally. And we also made a mistake, I think, not briefing President Johnson all along so that he saw the same things we did. So we knew that when this report came out, where it said racism, and it talked about spending a great deal more money against poverty, that was going to be somewhat of a shock. So we gave the report out with an embargo so that people would have a chance to be backgrounded and to learn sort of what was behind our recommendations. Then, I think with bad intent, in order to lessen its impact, somebody leaked the report to the Washington Post. We tried to talk them out of using it, but they said they got it legally and they were not going to do that. They were going to publish it the next morning. And so we said, well, we're going to give it to everybody then. And it was just absolute chaos. I remember, for example, an AP reporter called me that evening, and he said, I've got a 30-minute deadline. Here's a report that's about 400 and some pages long. And he said, I've got a 30-minute deadline. Can you just sort of capsulize it for me? Well, the result was that the headlines all across the country, the Post and everywhere else, were something like, white racism, cause of black riots, commission says. And my own father, who loved me, a small farmer in southwestern Oklahoma, the way he heard that commission report, the Kerner Commission report, was, Mr. Harris, out of the goodness of your heart, you ought to pay more taxes in order to help poor black people who are rioting in Detroit. And my dad's response was something like, well, to hell with that. I'm already paying too much tax. And he was right about that. We also, we didn't make clear enough, as we did say in the report, that we were interested in poverty wherever it was, rural or urban. We were interested in the problems of white people, black people, Hispanics, and American Indians and others. But my dad never heard that part of it, and I think a lot of other people didn't either. That we were as interested in his life and his problems as we were in people who had been involved in the riots.
And President Johnson was so committed to fighting poverty and with all his anti-poverty programs. Why didn't he adopt some of these recommendations?
Well, we had made an appointment with him to all the Kerner Commission and the principal staff to meet with him and deliver the report, and that had already been set up, and and we know now, we didn't then, but since found the letters, he had his staff had written letters up for him to sign, praising us for our report and thanking us and so forth, but he said, I'm not going to sign those, and he never did. But we understood from the White House staff that a Texas member of Congress, a close friend of Johnson's, had said to him, this commission, the Kerner Commission report, is going to ruin you. These were, we understood his words. It doesn't have it condones and encourages riots, and it doesn't have a good word to say about all you've done against poverty and racism, all of which was false. But Johnson, I think, believed it. He canceled the meeting with us. We'd asked also that he give us another 6 months of life so we could advocate for and lobby for our recommendations. Of course, that never happened. And as I said, that's a really sad thing because misinformed, that's the action he took, but Johnson. But it is sad to me because Johnson, as I said, did more against poverty and against racism than any of his predecessors or any of his successors since.
Now, you were famously seatmates with Senator Robert F. Kennedy,
Right.
From New York. In 1968, poverty was on his mind and would be until his
Right.
assassination during his presidential campaign. How did he respond to the report?
Well, during the during the study one time, he's a senator from New York, and he really saw, as Johnson did, Mayor Lindsay as a potential rival. Johnson thought Lindsay was going to run against him for president. He later did run for president. But Kennedy said to me, kind of jokingly, he said, what's it like to work with John Lindsay? Expecting me to say, well, he's just a dilettante and whatever. And I said, he is really terrific. I said, he is really engaged. He hasn't missed a meeting. He's very much involved in this, and his ideas are really terrific on doing something about racism and poverty. And Robert was a little bit incredulous, but I think it was good for him to hear that. But he was very much in favor of the report when it came out, and he caused Senator Joe Clark, chair of the relevant committee in the Senate, to hold public hearings so that we could come, Mayor Lindsay and I and others, and testify before the Senate committee in favor of our recommendations.
Martin Luther King's assassinated, Robert Kennedy's assassinated, President Richard Nixon's elected on a law and order platform. What happens with some of the recommendations during his presidency?
Well, we still made progress for a while, as I said, on race and poverty. But about the time of the advent of the Reagan-Bush administration, that's when the progress stopped. Nixon really tried to make hay out of the riots, that with law and order and so forth, and in a way, sort of speaking of in code about black people, and they had a Southern strategy, which everybody knows now, and I think Reagan did too, so that things went backward, and that's the way it's been ever since the advent of the Reagan administration, with the exception of the time when Bill Clinton was in. We began to make a little progress again, and then fell backwards. And then when Obama came in, we made some progress again, but then have, I'm afraid, moved backwards again.
Did we make progress during the Obama administration with some of the Department of Justice investigations into police and the consent decrees like here in Albuquerque? Did
We
you see-
did. President Obama appointed a commission to make recommendations in regard to the police, really good recommendations. But I don't think much was done after that from the federal level to try to get them implemented. And so we've had all these horrible police killings of black young men, and not in any instance has anybody ever been convicted on trial. No police officer. And I think there's a great deal of attitude change that's necessary, and I think we've got to use these lapel cameras much more and in a more widespread way, and get back to community policing again. Stop this militarization of the police, and where shooting is sort of a first thing. I think you know normally what you ought to do is send in some team that's going to try to cut down the problems that are confronting the police in those instances, rather than the SWAT team.
Now, it's been 50 years since the report. It's almost 50 years. You're about to release the 50th anniversary report, an update on race and poverty in America.
Right.
What is this new report going to tell us?
Well, quite sadly, the inequality of income and wealth in the country has worsened greatly since the time of the Kerner Report in 1968. And we're resegregating in our cities and housing and in schools, and that's really bad. We find that the incomes of African Americans and of Hispanics and so forth, other minorities, have not increased as others have. And it turns out, actually, in fairly recent years, there's been a stagnation of wages and income for middle income and poor people generally. Taxes have been cut for rich people, and there's effort now to try to do more of that. You know, with the idea that it stimulates economic growth and so forth, which has proven to be wrong right here in New Mexico, as in Kansas and anywhere else in the country or in the world. So things are really tougher. Poverty is harder to get out of now than it was back in our day. A lot of these mediating institutions have disappeared in the central cities. A lot of the central cities have begun to gentrify, so that the poverty's been sort of translated out to the suburbs and in some cases the exurbs. And we've really cut down the money that we've been spending on real dollars, on education and on training and on job creation and so forth. And that's what's hugely needed. When John Lindsay and I were walking around to these riot cities back then in 1968, we encountered often on the streets young black men of the type that could have been involved in the riots in that city. And what they all said to us, almost in a chorus, was jobs, man. They said, jobs, baby. A lot of them did. Jobs, baby. That's what we needed, jobs. Cincinnati, and streets of Cincinnati, young black men. One guy said, Mr. Johnson got me a job last summer. He's talking about President Johnson and the summer employment program. But that ran out, and that program, he said, we need jobs, baby. And that was the greatest need, and it is today.
The inequality and poverty that you speak of today and 50 years later, we don't have to accept that as a nation, right?
Yeah, poverty is a decision. You know, we decide we're going to have all this poverty. We don't have to. That's not true. We don't have to have it. We get our priorities straight. There's plenty of money to do what needs to be done, and there are plenty of jobs that need doing that we ought to be sure. For example, you know, we ought to be investing in the new kind of jobs in technology and in wind and solar energy, alternative energy generally, and so forth. There's plenty of jobs like that that ought to be in child care and particularly in education and health. We've got plenty of jobs that need doing, and there's a lot of people that need those jobs.
Well, Senator Fred Harris, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.